And soon enough, the official word arrived.
So can I just go ahead? 10 of the 19 systems have been announced as winners. And I'd like to share with you which ones they are. Of course, at the top of the list is Maryland.
On August 24th, 2010, the Maryland State Department of Education was thrilled to hear the news that Maryland was awarded a $250 million grant to fund education. This grant came from winning the second phase of the federal government's Race to the Top program and will be divided amongst Maryland school districts over the next few years. This was a momentous event for Maryland's Department of Education, but how do we manage to win the grant? Let's take a step back and focus on the need for a good education in the first place.
Education is important because it allows one to become a literate, critically thinking, functional member of society, and then one can contribute to society in a positive way.
Well, I think the purpose of an education is to bring out a potential in kids and a potential that makes them successful.
It's a socialization thing. It's teaching kids how to socialize and be sociable. And I think that's a very important aspect of education in itself. I think that's probably why it started. Is to get kids off the street, get them into a controlled environment, and at the same time, hey, let's teach them the 3 R's.
In 2009, the federal government revealed their values regarding education when they announced Race to the Top, an academic competition, in order to determine which states demonstrated the initiative to receive funding for education.
With the Race to the Top fund, we will reward states that come together and adopt a common set of standards and assessments.
The principles of Race to the Top are outlined on a detailed rubric which was used to determine which states would win federal education grants. This rubric weighed in heavily on the need for great teachers and leaders, followed by a state's success in implementing educational programs, standard and assessments, a general selection criteria or other category, a state's ability to turn around its lowest achieving schools, an introduction of data systems to support instruction, and, last but not least, a prioritization of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM, in the classroom.
It's a catch-22. If the state of Maryland wants to get money for our educational system, we have to, unfortunately, bow to the United States government's ideas of what they believe Maryland students need to learn.
This is my 38th year of teaching, and I've seen teaching change. Sometimes what happened 10 years ago and is dropped usually rolls around again. There are always new ideas in terms of how to teach.
I applaud the federal government, the new administration for latching out to a competitive, to a gene, an American gene, which is about competition, that nobody had figured out a way to tap before.
Competition drives people to do better, but for a very long time, there really has been no competition amongst schools. Now that there is, with Race to the Top, look at what that says with introducing competition. It says that not all schools will be equal. So then the challenge becomes, how do you make those more competitive?
When you have a competition where there's some winners and losers, and when you have to actually help all kids, there will always be criticism that what happens to the kids in the states that didn't win.
Each state has its own needs, and you have small states like Maryland, Rhode Island competing with places like Texas, Pennsylvania, California to get funding, and what is pertinent for a student in California to have and what someone in Maryland has may be totally different.
It is great to look at and try to seed promising programs, but we also have to be mindful, how are we going to help all kids get a great public education?
After the federal government initiated Race to the Top, Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley passed the Education Reform Act of 2010, which updated Maryland's current education policy. Today, debate exists over the content of this act as well as Race to the Top. Should education be handled on a state or a federal level?
The Reform Act has established where we want to go. Race to the Top has identified those projects that will get us there, the how. And we are now in the process of initiating those projects to get us there as quickly as possible. It's a 4-year process, so it's going to take time.
Maryland certainly had the authority to define the standards of excellence or standard of performance for its educational programs.
I believe it's Maryland's responsibility as a state to educate our students the best way possible. Do I believe that that Reform Act will do that? No, I do not.
I happen to think that the components of the Reform Act that made it to the Race to the Top application are good education policy. The role of the federal government in education has been growing and will continue to grow, in part because we've become far more dependent on federal dollars than we were before. And if we're accepting federal dollars, I think that we should be ready to accept the conditions for it.
There is no language in the Constitution that speak to the federal government running schools and education. That is the responsibility of the state and local government.
Even though creating educational programs is the responsibility of the states, it is very interesting to see the effects of Race to the Top, a federal education plan. When the federal government devised this competition, it created incentives for states to revise their current education systems, like Maryland did with the Education Reform Act. With the money Maryland received from Race to the Top, we as a community and as a state can certainly find ways to continue to improve our educational programs as we move forward into the future.
You know, as a society, we have an obligation to all our kids. We have an obligation to transcend whatever their family circumstances might be, and you know, we need to make sure that we bring out a strength in all our kids that are going to serve us all in the long run.